It always takes exactly 3 seconds for your world to collapse. I counted. 1. The conference room door flies open without warning. 2. 12 heads snap in unison toward the doorway, eyes locking onto the flushed, furious face of our CEO. 3. His finger extends, sharp and accusing, pointing straight at me as he delivers the sentence that detonates everything. I'll never erase. It's always the quiet ones. Heat surged up my neck, my cheeks burning as if I'd been slapped. Every person at the table turned toward me, their expressions hardening in real time. 24 eyes boring into me, suspicion replacing familiarity in a heartbeat. In that instant, I understood something I'd never allowed myself to see before. Being exceptional at your job means nothing when someone powerful decides they need a scapegoat. I'm Margot Levine, 33 years old, and before I go any further with what happened that day at Helix Dynamics, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I still struggle to believe I'm telling this story out loud. Each time I do, it feels like another knot loosens in my chest, like I can finally breathe a little deeper. 4 years at the company, 4 years of being the first one in and the last one out, 4 years of hearing "Thank you, Margot," and "What would we do without you, Margot?" And in the span of 3 seconds, I became the office pariah. Our CEO, Richard Blackwell, known to Rick to everyone except me because I could never stomach the forced familiarity, stood rigid at the head of the table that Thursday morning. The veins at his temples throbbed as though they might burst. Behind him, the projection screen glowed with a spreadsheet, a massive red number screaming for attention. $2,367,112. "Someone in this room is stealing from my company," he said, his voice unnervingly calm, the kind of calm men like him use right before they destroy someone's life. "We have a discrepancy of over $2 million, and I want answers." The 12 of us sat frozen. Devin from marketing tugged at his perpetually loosened tie. Amara from client relations shifted uncomfortably, still adjusting to life back at work after maternity leave. Terrence, our silent tech wizard, stared at the table. Lucia, the office manager who knew every secret and every affair, folded her hands tightly. The rest of us were members of the Special Projects Unit, trusted with Helix's most sensitive client accounts. And then there was me, the financial compliance specialist, the person responsible for tracking every dollar, validating every transaction, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. The irony hung heavy in the room. Richard continued, pacing now. This wasn't sloppy, it was calculated, sophisticated, nearly invisible, but my external auditors caught the pattern. My stomach dropped. 8 months, that's how long the discrepancies had been happening. 8 months ago was exactly when Richard had personally transferred me into this unit, telling me he needed "someone with your precision." Now I understood why. He slammed a thick folder onto the table. $2.3 million siphoned through dozens of microtransactions, he said, locking his gaze onto mine, all approved within this room by someone who thought they were smarter than me. A thin line of sweat traced its way down my spine as he stepped closer, looming over my chair. "Margot here is our numbers person," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Always quiet, always watching, always documenting." He practically spat the last word. "It's always the quiet ones who think they won't get caught." I tried to speak, but my throat locked. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I had built my entire identity around being dependable, precise, unimpeachable. I triple-checked everything. I lived by systems and rules. And now, in front of colleagues I had bent myself into knots to support, I was being painted as a criminal. "Sir," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper, humiliating in its fragility, "there has to be a mistake." He laughed softly, cold and dismissive. "I don't make mistakes, Miss Levine. Apparently you do. I've already contacted the authorities. They'll be here within the hour." The word hit like a physical blow. Police. Someone muttered, "Check her computer." It was Dominic, our team lead, who had always bristled at how closely I worked with Richard. "Already done," Richard replied smoothly. "Found plenty." That was the moment everything clicked. This wasn't sloppy, it was choreography. This wasn't an accusation, this was an execution. You know that point where fear transforms into something entirely different? When your body goes numb and calm floods in because you've reached rock bottom and clarity suddenly sharpens every thought. That's where I landed. My hands stopped shaking as I reached for my phone. "Sir," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, "you might want to see this." Richard smirked. "A confession? How thoughtful." "Not exactly." I opened the encrypted folder I'd been maintaining for 10 months, long before I ever joined this team, and handed him my phone. A video played. His face shifted as he watched. Confusion, then disbelief, then unmistakable fear. 10 months earlier, I'd noticed subtle irregularities in our transaction logs, tiny anomalies most people would dismiss, but patterns don't lie. I'd taken my concerns to my former supervisor and been waved off, so I started documenting. Screenshots, backups, audio recordings of meetings, versions of files before and after edits, not because I suspected fraud, but because I was tired of being ignored. When Richard reassigned me to special projects, I kept documenting out of habit. That habit turned into a record of 6 separate instances where Richard instructed me to adjust billing entries. Each time he framed it as a correction, a balance, a temporary fix. Each time I complied while quietly preserving the original data. 3 weeks ago, the full picture snapped into focus. 10 months of evidence showing exactly how $2.3 million disappeared and exactly whose orders made it happen. "You recorded our private meetings?" Richard whispered, his face ashen. "One-party consent state," I replied, "and that's far from all I have." The room was silent. You could feel the power shifting, see it registering on every face. "Those are confidential matters," he snapped. "You violated company policy." "Interesting," I said evenly. "That's your concern right now? Not the fraud, not the fact that you almost had me arrested to cover it up." "Everyone out," he barked suddenly, "except Margot." No one moved. Dominic stood first. "I think we should stay." His eyes met mine, not with pity, but something closer to respect. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went pale. "This meeting is over. We'll handle this privately." "No," I said, "we won't." My voice didn't shake. "Everything in that folder is backed up in 3 secure locations, including my lawyer's office. You have 20 minutes before the authorities arrive. The ones I called." "You stupid," he began. "Don't," Lucia cut in sharply. "She has enough to end you already." The next 20 minutes blurred together. Richard barricaded himself in his office. Security hovered. People whispered. I sat alone at the conference table, gripping the armrests to keep myself from shaking apart. I'd done everything right my whole life, followed every rule, and somehow ended up here.
When the FBI agents arrived, real ones, I handed over my phone and months of meticulously organized evidence. "You've been tracking this how long?" one of them asked. "Since I knew something was wrong," I said. "No one listened." "They are now," she replied. Richard was escorted out. No handcuffs, just the slow, humiliating walk past the empire he'd ruled. He stopped beside me. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No one hires a whistleblower." Maybe he was right, but as I watched him leave, I realized I was done being afraid. Weeks later, the company unraveled. Executives resigned, auditors swarmed, the special projects unit dissolved. Then Amara called. The board wanted to rebuild, and they asked for me. The next morning, I walked back into headquarters in my sharpest professional outfit. As I entered the boardroom, sunlight flooding through floor-to-ceiling windows, I finally understood the truth. It is always the quiet ones. Because we're watching, we're noticing, we're recording, and when pushed too far, we finally speak. Now they studied me with careful interest as I took the seat across from Diane Mercer, the board's chairwoman. "Miss Levine," she began, her voice crisp and professional, "I want to begin by acknowledging your courage. What you did prevented this company from far worse consequences." The words sounded practiced, something her crisis team probably crafted. I nodded once, but stayed silent. I'd learned silence unsettles powerful people. Let them fill it. "We've completed a comprehensive investigation," said Lawrence Chen, the company's lead counsel. "The fraud goes back 18 months and implicates 7 executives, including Richard. 4 have already resigned. 3 are fighting their termination." My throat tightened. 7 executives knew, enabled, or purposely ignored what was happening? Lawrence added, "The $2.3 million Richard accused your team of taking is only what we've confirmed so far." I thought of my former coworkers, 11 people who had been under suspicion, their reputations dragged through the mud. What happens to my team? Diane exchanged a look with the others. "That's part of why we wanted to meet with you. We're restructuring the company. Several departments will merge, and we need people we can trust to help rebuild." Here it came, the job offer Amara hinted at. I steadied myself. "We'd like you to head the new financial compliance division," Diane said. "You'd report directly to the board with a significant salary increase and the authority to assemble your own team." My pulse quickened. This was beyond anything I had imagined. A director-level role, multiple levels above where I'd been before, the kind of position that normally demand an MBA and a decade and a half of experience, the sort of role no one would have even imagined offering me a month ago. "Why me?" I asked, not fishing for praise, but honestly needing clarity. Diane's professionally polished expression slipped. "Frankly, Miss Levine, we're dealing with a credibility issue. We require someone with unquestionable integrity, someone who's already proven they'll choose what's right, even when it's painful." Translation: they needed my reputation to rescue theirs, my whistleblowing as a corporate shield. I'd become their ethics emblem, proof that the company had scrubbed itself clean. "And if I say no?" I asked. "We'd completely understand," Lawrence replied smoothly. "You'd receive a generous severance package, strong references, and an NDA, I assume?" I cut in. The brief silence confirmed everything. They'd pay me to disappear quietly if that's what I wanted. I glanced around the table at these powerful people who suddenly required something from me. A month earlier, I would have accepted whatever they offered, thankful for any scrap of recognition. But that version of Margot died the day Richard tried to ruin her. "I'd like to suggest another option," I said, startled by how steady my voice sounded. "I'll consider the role, but I have conditions." The atmosphere shifted, brows lifting. This wasn't part of their script. "We're open to discussion," Diane said wearily. "First, my whole team gets cleared publicly, a company-wide announcement stating they've been exonerated, plus bonuses for the ordeal they endured." Lawrence jotted notes. "That seems fair." "Second, I want to personally interview everyone in the finance department. Anyone who remains will report directly to me, and I need to trust them." More nods circled the room. "Third, I want Richard's office." That froze them. Richard's corner office was usually reserved for senior executives. "That's not typical for a director-level position," Martin from HR spoke, speaking for the first time. I held his gaze. "Nothing about this situation is typical." Diane examined me for a long beat, then nodded. "Anything else?" I inhaled deeply. "Yes, no NDA. I won't publicly criticize the company if you act in good faith, but I won't sign away my right to speak."
The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. That's extremely uncommon, Lawrence began. So is being falsely accused of embezzlement by your CEO, I replied. I never asked for any of this, but now that we're here, I need to be sure I'm stepping into something better, not just something new. Diane dismissed everyone except herself and Lawrence. For 45 minutes, we negotiated point by point. By the time I stepped out of that boardroom, I had every term in writing and something even rarer: respect. The following morning, when I walked into what used to be Richard's office, now mine, I felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Triumph, absolutely, but also a sorrow for what it had cost to reach this point. I traced my fingers along the expensive desk where he once plotted my downfall and reflected on power, how it alters people, how it can warp them, and how fiercely I never wanted it to twist me. A knock on the door. Lucia stood holding a small plant. Office warming gift, she said, setting it on my desk. Hard to kill even for people who forget to water things. Kind of like your career, apparently. I laughed, a real laugh for the first time in weeks. Have you heard from the others? I asked. Everyone's been called in for meetings today, rumors about restructuring. About you? She hesitated, examining my expression. So it's true, you're running things now. A department, not the entire company, I clarified, and I'd like you to be my second in command. Her eyes widened. Me? I'm office management, not finance. You're organized, observant, and more importantly, you stood up for me that day when it would have been easier not to. I need people I can rely on. Over the next week, I met with each member of our old team, plus dozens more from finance and accounting. I brought in Terrence to build customized security systems for our new division, invited Amara to manage external communications. Even Dominic, who originally suggested checking my computer, showed enough remorse and capability to earn a spot. Only Devin declined my offer. I'm sorry, Margot, but this place feels contaminated to me now, he said. I've accepted a role elsewhere. I respected that. Not everyone is willing to rebuild from wreckage. The work was more demanding than anything I'd ever tackled. 16-hour days became routine. We uncovered even more financial discrepancies as we dug further. Richard's scheme had threaded itself through multiple corners of the company.
Each finding brought a sense of vindication, but also reminded me how narrowly I'd avoided being sacrificed for all of it. 3 months into my new position, I received a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? Enjoy it while you can. I recognized the sender instantly. My hands trembled as I showed the message to Lawrence. We'll take care of this, he assured me. Richard's being investigated by 3 different agencies. This will only make his situation worse. But that night, alone in my apartment, the fear wouldn't leave me. Richard had been influential and well-connected. What if he still had allies inside the company? What if this was only the start of his retaliation? I barely slept, jumping at every small noise. The next morning, I arrived at work with dark circles beneath my eyes, tensing when my phone buzzed with a new notification. It wasn't Richard this time, but a news alert. Former Helix Dynamics CEO Richard Blackwell arrested on multiple fraud counts. The article showed his mugshot, unshaven, hollow-eyed, nothing like the imposing figure who had once jabbed his finger at me in accusation. The FBI had uncovered evidence of similar schemes at his 2 prior companies. This wasn't his first fraud, just the first time he'd finally been caught. That evening, as I was leaving the office, I crossed paths with Diane in the elevator. I assume you've seen the news? She said. I nodded. The prosecutors reached out. They want you to testify. My stomach twisted. The idea of facing Richard in court, of having to relive that humiliating confrontation, made me feel physically sick. Do I have a choice? I asked. Legally, yes. Practically, she didn't finish the sentence. We both understood what she meant. If I refused to testify, it would undermine everything I'd fought to restore. The preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in early December.
I spent the night before practicing my testimony with Lawrence, preparing for every possible angle. Just tell the truth, he advised. That's all you need to do. But stepping into that courtroom the next day felt like marching into battle. My carefully chosen outfit, a charcoal gray suit, nothing loud, felt like armor. My neatly organized folder of documents, a shield. And then Richard appeared, sitting beside his attorney wearing a suit that sagged on his thinner frame. He'd lost weight. When he turned and spotted me, his expression snapped from empty to venomous so fast it made me recoil. I expected fear. Instead, I felt nothing. This man held no power over me anymore. When I took the stand, my voice stayed steady. I answered each question plainly, referencing my records when needed. I explained the transactions, the fraud pattern, how Richard had positioned me as the scapegoat. Richard's attorney tried to paint me as an ambitious employee who'd betrayed her boss to advance her own career. Isn't it convenient that you're now in a director-level role after accusing Mr. Blackwell? There was nothing convenient about any of this, I replied. I lost friends. I still suffer anxiety attacks. I checked my locks 3 times before bed, but I didn't have a choice. It was either speak up or go to prison for something I didn't do. When it was over, I walked past Richard without looking at him. Outside, reporters swarmed with cameras and microphones. Miss Levine, how does it feel to take down your former boss? Will you stay at Helix Dynamics? Do you consider yourself a hero? I pushed through them without answering. This wasn't about heroism or revenge. It was about survival. 6 months after that first accusation, Richard pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges. The details became public. He'd siphoned money to cover personal gambling debts, orchestrated complex cover-ups, and was preparing to flee the country when his scheme began to unravel. He received 8 years in federal prison. The company survived, though it had changed. We lost clients initially, but gained new ones who valued our stronger transparency measures. The Levine I protocols, as they came to be known internally, set a new benchmark for financial compliance. My team, my real team, the people who'd endured hell with me, became the company's most cohesive unit. We had seen the worst and chosen to rebuild anyway. That creates a bond nothing can break. A year to the day after Richard had stormed into that conference room, pointing at me, I gathered my team. I want to thank you, I said, looking at these people who had become more than colleagues. A year ago, we were almost destroyed by someone who believed power meant never being questioned. You could have left, found safer jobs. Instead, you stayed to repair what was broken. We stayed because of you, Lucia said. You showed us what real leadership looks like. That night, I sat alone in my office, no longer thinking of it as Richard's, and reflected on how completely my life had shifted. I'd never sought power or attention. I just wanted to do my job well and be treated with basic respect. Instead, I had been thrown into a crucible that burned away my fear of confrontation, my need for approval, my habit of shrinking myself. What emerged wasn't perfect or fearless, but stronger, more authentic. Richard had been right about one thing: it is always the quiet ones you need to watch. Not because we plot against you, but because we see everything. We notice patterns. We keep receipts, and when pushed too far, we don't just speak up, we transform. 2 years later, I was promoted to CFO. The day the announcement went public, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about my promotion and a single line written in familiar handwriting: "Congratulations, you won." I didn't respond. Some victories don't need acknowledgement. Sometimes living well really is the best revenge. Is my story unique? Maybe not. Corporate fraud happens every day. Whistleblowers face retaliation. Power corrupts. Systems protect themselves. What's unique is that I survived to tell it, that I found my voice when it mattered most, that I learned the difference between being quiet and being silenced. So, if you're watching this and something in my story resonates, if you're the quiet one, the careful one, the observer, know this: your attention to detail isn't overthinking, your caution isn't weakness, your documentation isn't paranoia. It might save you one day. And if you're the Richard in someone's story, the one who uses power to crush those beneath you, believing you're untouchable, know this too: the quiet ones are watching, always watching. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up to someone more powerful than you? What gave you the courage to speak up? Or if you stayed silent, what held you back? Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated, please subscribe. There's strength in shared experience, in knowing we're not alone when we're tested. Because ultimately, that's what my story is about. Not fraud, not corporate politics, not revenge. It's about the moment you decide who you really are, when everything is on the line, when the comfortable mask of who you've been is ripped away, and you discover the person you've always been beneath it. Sometimes it takes nearly being destroyed to see how powerful you really are.